The screen erupts with the blinding flash of an atomic mushroom cloud rising over a Japanese city, its deadly beauty captured in stark black and white footage that seems to crystallize the ultimate horror of modern warfare. As the camera pulls back to reveal the devastation below, a voice cuts through the silence with a statistic so staggering it almost doesn't register as real. Between 1939 and 1945, in just 6 years, one war killed between 70 and 85 million people, representing roughly 3% of the entire world's population at the time. To put that in perspective, if a similar percentage died today, it would mean over 200 million deaths. The montage accelerates images flashing across the screen in rapid succession. Adolf Hitler's arm raised in salute before a sea of Nazi flags and frenzied crowds in Nuremberg, the USS. Arizona exploding in a fireball at Pearl Harbor as Japanese planes streak overhead. Thousands of Allied soldiers storming the beaches of Normandy into a wall of machine gun fire. Skeletal concentration camp survivors staring hollow-eyed through barbed wire fences. Soviet soldiers raising the red flag over the shattered Reichstag in Berlin. And finally, those mushroom clouds over Hiroshima and Nagasaki that announced humanity had gained the power to destroy itself completely. Then comes the question that demands an answer, echoing across the decades. How did the world descend into this madness just 20 years after finishing what they called the war to end all wars? What sequence of events? What failures of leadership and morality? What economic disasters and political movements could possibly lead the world to tear itself apart on a scale that dwarfed even the horrors of World War I? How did civilization, which had learned such painful lessons between 1914 and 1918, march straight into an even greater catastrophe that would kill 4 times as many people and culminate in genocide and nuclear weapons? To understand World War II, you need to understand that the world in 1939 was still bleeding from wounds that had never properly healed. The Treaty of Versailles that ended World War I had imposed such harsh terms on Germany that it created a nation filled with resentment, humiliation, and economic desperation. When the Great Depression struck in 1929, it didn't just crash stock markets, it destroyed millions of lives, created mass unemployment, and made people desperate enough to listen to extreme political movements that promised simple solutions to complex problems. In Germany, a failed Austrian artist and World War I veteran named Adolf Hitler rose to power by blaming all of Germany's problems on the Versailles Treaty, on communists and especially on Jewish people, weaving these hatreds into a toxic ideology called Nazism that promised to restore German greatness through military expansion and racial purity. In Italy, Benito Mussolini had already established a fascist dictatorship that glorified war and conquest, dreaming of rebuilding the Roman Empire. In Japan, military leaders had taken control of the government and embarked on a campaign of imperial expansion across Asia, convinced of their divine right to rule over what they called the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, though in reality it meant brutal occupation and exploitation. And in the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin had consolidated power through purges and terror, creating a communist state that the Western democracies feared almost as much as they feared the fascists. What made World War II fundamentally different from its predecessor was that this wasn't just about territory and resources entangled alliances. This was ideological warfare on a scale never seen before, a clash between fascism, communism, and democracy where each side believed they were fighting for the very soul of human civilization. This would be total war in the truest sense, where entire economies were mobilized, where civilians became targets, where ancient cities were reduced to rubble, where industrial methods were applied not just to weapons production, but to genocide itself. The geographic scope alone tells you how completely this war consumed the world. Battles were fought in the frozen forests of Finland and the scorching deserts of North Africa, in the jungles of Burma, and the islands of the Pacific in the skies over Britain, and the ruins of Stalingrad in the Atlantic where submarines hunted convoys, and on the beaches of Normandy where the fate of Europe hung in the balance. Over the next 12 minutes, we're going to trace how this catastrophe unfolded from Hitler's rise to power in 1933, the appeasement that let him grow strong through the Blitzkrieg conquests that saw most of Europe fall under Nazi control, through the turning points where the tide began to shift against the Axis powers, and finally to the brutal final campaigns that ended with mushroom clouds over Japan and a world transformed, forever left to grapple with the atomic age, the Holocaust, and a new Cold War that would define the next half-century of human history. The road to war, minus 1933 to 1939. Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in January 1933, and within months had transformed the country from a struggling democracy into a totalitarian dictatorship. The Nazi Party exploited the German people's humiliation over the Versailles Treaty and their desperation during the Great Depression, offering scapegoats Jews, communists, and foreign enemies, and promising to make Germany great again. Hitler immediately began secretly rearming Germany in violation of Versailles, building up the military that would soon terrorize Europe. But the Western democracies, traumatized by World War I and desperate to avoid another conflict, pursued a policy of appeasement, giving Hitler concession after concession in the hope that each would be his last demand. In 1935, Mussolini's Italy invaded Ethiopia, using poison gas against poorly armed African defenders, while the League of Nations proved utterly toothless. The Spanish Civil War from 1936 to 1939 became a rehearsal for World War II, with Germany and Italy supporting Franco's fascists while the Soviet Union backed the Republicans, testing new weapons and tactics, including the deliberate bombing of civilian populations. In Asia, Japan had invaded Manchuria in 1931 and launched a full-scale invasion of China in 1937, committing horrific atrocities, including the rape of Nanking, where Japanese soldiers murdered an estimated 300,000 Chinese civilians and raped tens of thousands of women. Hitler grew bolder with each success. In 1936, he remilitarized the Rhineland. In 1938, he annexed Austria in the Anschluss, and then demanded the Sudetenland region of Czechoslovakia. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain flew to Munich and agreed to give Hitler the Sudetenland in exchange for a promise of peace, returning home waving the agreement and declaring peace for our time. 6 months later, Hitler seized the rest of Czechoslovakia, revealing appeasement as the catastrophic failure it was. On August 23, 1939, the world was shocked when Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia, supposedly mortal ideological enemies, signed a non-aggression pact that secretly divided Eastern Europe between them. 9 days later, on September 1, 1939, Hitler invaded Poland with overwhelming force, and this time, Britain and France had finally drawn a line they couldn't ignore. On September 3rd, they declared war on Germany, and the world was at war again. Chapter 2: Blitzkrieg and Axis Dominance. 1939 to 1941. Poland fell in just 27 days to a new kind of warfare the Germans called Blitzkrieg, lightning war, where tanks, aircraft, and mechanized infantry worked together in coordinated assaults that shattered traditional defensive lines. While Germany invaded from the west, the Soviet Union invaded from the east under their secret agreement, and Poland was erased from the map once again. Then came the strange period called the Phony War, where Britain and France declared war, but did almost nothing through the winter of 1939-1940, as if hoping the whole thing might just blow over. Hitler shattered that illusion in April 1940 by invading Denmark and Norway, then on May 10th launched the attack westward that everyone had been dreading. Belgium and the Netherlands fell within days, but the real shock came when German tanks drove through the supposedly impassable Ardennes forest and broke through French lines, racing to the English Channel and trapping the British and French armies. Over 300,000 Allied troops were evacuated from the beaches of Dunkirk in an improvised rescue using everything from naval destroyers to civilian fishing boats, saving the army but leaving behind all their equipment. France, which had held out for 4 years in World War I, collapsed in just 6 weeks. Hitler literally danced a jig of joy when the French signed their surrender in the same railway car where Germany had surrendered in 1918. Britain now stood alone, and Hitler planned Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain. But first, he needed to destroy the Royal Air Force. Through the summer and fall of 1940, the Battle of Britain raged in the skies as German bombers and fighters tried to overwhelm the RAF. But British pilots, aided by radar technology and fighting over their own territory, shot down enough German aircraft that Hitler was forced to abandon the invasion. Instead, the Luftwaffe turned to bombing British cities in the Blitz, trying to break civilian morale through terror, but the British refused to break. Meanwhile, Mussolini,